Those who pick it up that way. So this morning's session is our last in the series on a pilgrimage. We've had this is the sixth session, and we started on March 8th. And just to remind you, we had the one at the start that was a great introduction to it by David, and then we had Carol, who did a session on outer and inner journey. We had Earl's session on Jesus, model pilgrim, and God's compassionate face.
And William and Kevin.
We had the second one. We had the second one on by Carol, and last week we had a great session by Bishop John Organ and John Courage. And today we have Gerald doing Pilgrim Guide, mentoring others to be pilgrims. So Gerald, we'll pass it on to you, and I know will lead us in a prayer, and then bring us through your session. So thanks for preparing this and being part of the planning of it as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. Good morning, Derek. Just come in.
Morning. And we'll take a moment, Gerald, just to let you know who's here in the room. You can see, of course, you recognize everyone anyway, but just to introduce them, Derek is here, Derek Bishop, and Carmel, and Tom, and Frank, myself, and Neil, and David.
Perfect.
Great.
And Rick.
Yeah. And Rick.
And 6 weeks ago, when David was telling us about pilgrimage, at the very heart of pilgrimage is the changing of our state of mind. It is about the transformation of consciousness. Pilgrimage is about our deepening toward God. Pilgrimage is an intentional process where it is learning to see as God sees. It is an awakening to the reality that God is a pilgrim, having a human experience as you. So it's about that transformation of consciousness where we learn to see from our spiritual hearts or our mind of Christ, the world. So I just want to begin with John Philip Newell. And the prayer is about inviting us to see as God sees. And so I'll read the prayer once, maybe twice. We'll just see, and then we'll have a little bit of silence. And in the silence, just to the invitation is for you to deepen your awareness around that not only is God here as a pilgrim, but how interconnected we are as made in the image of God, but the interconnectivity I'd like to. So again, now the prayer will follow by silence. Like an infant's open-eyed wonder, and the insights of a wise grandmother. Like a young man's vision for justice, and the vitality that shines in a girl's face. Like tears that flow in a friend bereaved, and laughter in a lover's eyes. You have given us ways of seeing, O God. You have endowed us with sight like your own. Let these be alive in us this day. Let these be alive in us. You've given us ways of seeing, O God. You have endowed us with sight like your own. Let these be alive in us this day. Let these be alive in us. Amen. Isn't that a beautiful prayer?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the whole objective and intention of our lives is a transformation of our consciousness. That's what spiritual journey is about. And it's about learning how to see. You know, we're dying to, you know, our self-consciousness and our old ways. You know, especially as we're working this way from Lent to Easter, rather than renew those baptismal promises at the Easter Vigil on Saturday night and on Sunday morning. Dying to the self and awakening to the Christ self, the risen Christ. You've given us ways of seeing, O God. You've endowed us with sight like your own. And so that's what pilgrimage is about. It's about learning to see as God sees. And so we began this process 6 months ago with David, 6 weeks ago with David, and you know, beginning with that whole thing around the transformation of our state of mind. Carol, that beautiful invitation to deepening toward God. I mean, that's beautiful. That's at the very heart of the pilgrim heart. Earl with those stories, beautiful stories about Jesus. Carol again with reflecting on the experience of pilgrimage within the context of intentional spiritual community. And I'm going to reflect a little bit about that, touch on that a little bit And Bishop John and Father John, of course, share their own rich personal experiences of pilgrimage. And today our mentoring. So over this last 6 weeks, we've been mentored. I mean, as each presenter has been sharing with us and inviting us into our own awareness and understanding of pilgrimage, we've been mentored throughout this whole process. There has to be an intent to offer an opportunity, or there has been in the 6 weeks, to reflect spiritually on what pilgrimage is. And I think because of the people who have been here participating in this pilgrimage series, you know, we are able to name our own draw towards pilgrimage as a spiritual practice. Ms. Ward, she's the director of the spiritual guidance program at Shalem. And she says, with reference to prayer practice, she says, whatever it is that draws you to and deepens your experience of God, go and do it. You know, so our desire to deepen toward God is an erotic, it's eros, it's an energy that draws us into any of the myriad forms of spiritual practice. And so whatever it is for us, you know, that draws us towards God, that's what we should be doing. And there's so many different ways, and pilgrimage is just one of those ways. So we ask ourselves as spiritual people and leaders, what is it that awakens your soul in God? Then we need to be able to go and do it and become familiar with that path, whatever that path is. So to mentor others on a particular spiritual path, we have to become familiar with that path, with that particular path. So this series has been about pilgrimage as a spiritual path and practice in the context of so many different spiritual practices. So if you feel to mentor others on the pilgrim path, then you need to be practiced in being a pilgrim yourself. So in order to lead others in pilgrimage, we need to be intentional pilgrims ourselves. So two things I want to highlight in this little presentation is where we are practiced and mentored ourselves, and out of that practice and mentoring as spiritual leaders, that we can become mentors ourselves. So I just want to touch on holy sites around the world. I know John and John done that last week, but also about Newfoundland Labrador landscape. So of course, if we have the time and the resources, being able to visit, you know, various holy sites around the world is an important thing to be able to do for us as spiritual practice. So I've done a number of solo pilgrimages as a young priest with a high church orientation at that time. It was important for me in the early formative years to make those solo pilgrimages to the holy sites of Anglicanism. Father John spoke about some of those last week. Canterbury and Westminster Abbey, they were important places for me for annual pilgrimage. They helped me to connect with the deep spiritual tradition that I'm part of. And so that visiting those places, being in those places, going to those places, had a very important effect on me as a solo pilgrim. And as a budding contemplative in those early years, it was also important for me to make an annual pilgrimage to the contemplative Benedictine community at Elmore Abbey. And that helped feed and form my soul. So that was another form of solo and pilgrimage for me that I was drawn to. I was drawn to these places, and I became familiar with these places. Solo pilgrimages. Community is a whole different experience than going by yourself. I was being a pilgrim in the community of Jerusalem. That was a life-changing experience for me. And likewise, being a pilgrim on Shalom's Iona pilgrimage was an amazing and rich communal experience for me also. So both solo and in community, I was drawn as a pilgrim, so these things fed my soul. And so like Liz Ward says, whatever it is that feeds your soul, go and do it. So I've gone and I've done these things. And that's what we do. Whatever feeds our soul, we go and do it. So being a participant in both kinds of pilgrimages, mentoring is happening. By going and being a participant, mentoring is happening in that process. And not only in the effects in the soul deepening toward God, but in the opening up of the potential to be a mentor for others in pilgrimage. So that's just a kind of a key point here, so that in order to mentor others in pilgrimage, we have to be very intentional in the pilgrimage practice ourselves by going and doing it and becoming familiar with that path. Now, having said all that, the inspiration behind this Queen series, Lenten Pilgrimage series, has been how to more intentionally see Newfoundland and Labrador as a place of pilgrimage. Now, for me, personally, I never really looked at Newfoundland as a place of spiritual pilgrimage until a number of years ago. Carol suggested to me, Carol Crumley, invited me with her to discern the possibility of a Shalom pilgrimage to Newfoundland. So all the different things I've been doing out around, what have you, and just never, Newfoundland, a holy place. It was right there all the time, but I just never looked at it in that kind of way. And I think that might be similar for many of us, around, in our parishes around the island and Labrador, to not really see where we live as an invitation to encounter the holy. So of course, we began this process of discerning a pilgrimage with Shalom here. And I just want to read you a draft copy of what Carol wrote as part of the invitation for the Shalom pilgrimage. And it's entitled Newfoundland, A World Apart. Listen to this, and we'll have a little opener for a little discussion after. This is what she wrote. Newfoundland, called by some a marvelous, terrible place, is home to rugged landscapes and wild ocean cliffs, seabirds and fossils, whales and icebergs, historic villages and stony beaches, and most of all, a people with an uncommon spirit of hospitality. To some, it is a mystical landscape full of poetry, wonder, and story. To others, it is a way of life, sustained in the midst of harsh realities and unbreakable bonds to land and sea, neighbors and kin. In this age of cynicism, mobility, and constant change, Newfoundland offers those of us who come from away a chance to cleanse our souls, a spring cleaning, so to speak, with the awesome wildness of nature. This cleansing allows hearing and seeing more clearly from the spiritual heart. It touches a deep longing to live wild and free with purpose and passion. And it uncovers the heart's knowing of what is needed now to do and be. It is where what has been lost can be found, a new found land. On this pilgrimage, we will journey to the edge of the continent to voice our prayers, walk on the wild and beautiful barrens, home to the oldest complex fossil organisms on Earth, visit the site where Titanic's distress call was first received and answered. See the Cape Race Lighthouse, whose keepers have kept their vigil for over 150 years. Enjoy a sunset cruise with whales, puffins, and other ocean wonders. Walk prayerfully on beach trails, sensing oneness with all of creation. Gaze on the beauty and majesty of the ocean coastline. Reflect with others on what is being experienced. And finally, celebrate our life together with a traditional Newfoundland feast and screeching in ceremony. Through it all, this pilgrimage invites us to immerse ourselves in the deep waters of the and pray with others, seek the cleansing, healing, wild beauty of a world apart. Wow. Rick, can you just put up the class screen there, please, so I can see everybody for a moment?
Do what?
Put on the camera again for us.
Oh, our camera.
Yeah.
So what do you think of that invitation to pilgrimage to Newfoundland when you hear that read? Derek, how does that make you feel?
Well, it sounds like an exciting place to visit. And in many ways, as you were saying, I was thinking about, in reality, some of, I guess, my most spiritual experiences have been in places where, I guess, the sea and the land meet. And I haven't been to Mistaken Point yet, and I was thinking that's a place that I should go, because going as a pilgrim to a place, the beginning of the creation.
Yes.
And I thought that would be a marvelous thing to actually be there to experience that.
Mm-hmm. In your backyard. Everybody else, when you hear that invitation to pilgrimage in Newfoundland, how does it make you feel?
I've walked a lot of that trail. Not all of it, but a lot of it. It's accurate, straightforward, accurate. It's not overblown. It's for real. I think one of the big pieces of just thinking after you had read it, and I think the big piece, the interesting big piece, is that because it's a trail and not a road, you're away from all of the signs of inhabitation, of people living there, and you're away from, for most of it anyway, from places where people live, so that there's nothing that distracts you from the world that you're in. You're immersed in the natural as opposed to the created. And I think that's probably one of the reasons I like to walk trails as opposed to paths through communities and other things.
Sure. How about yourself, Rick, when you hear that, when the context of, as a spiritual practice, the rich resource that we have. And I guess the question too is, until someone from the outside posed it to me as a discernment question around spiritual pilgrimage in Newfoundland, I had never thought about it until that point as a possibility, or even and larger. I'm going to talk about small scale stuff now at once. But so, Rick, when you hear that, I mean, does it?
A couple of things come to my mind. One, over this series of pilgrimage, I often remember a comment my father made a few times. Dad was in the Second World War in the Royal Navy, and so he, traveled the oceans, but also went ashore on leave, young man, on all the continents. But oftentimes, after the war, he came back and he settled down in St. Joseph's and Mary's Bay, and seldom wanted to go much further than his job needed him, which basically kept him on the Avalon. I think he only left the island once for a short trip, or a couple of times maybe, see different people graduated and what have you. But of course, in when we were growing up in the 60s and what have you, the instinct was to go away for work was the main thing. And we would often, and we had, relatives who went away and didn't come back. They'd come back then as big shots, as we'd call them. They were visitors and Yanks at that time. But he would often say, he had been around the world, very real way. But he never found anywhere that he enjoyed being as much as on Seminary Arm, you know. And often, you know, as I've gotten older, there are times, you know, and I go up and down Seminary Arm oodles of times in the sailboat, and I walk up the road and the beaches and the meadows and what have you all the time. But whenever it is or wherever it is, there's that, you know, and the scenes that are brought to mind when you read the advertisement there, it's really about pausing in a moment to appreciate it.
Yes.
I've passed along by millions of tons of ice and didn't glimpse at it. Didn't
exactly
bother me. Come up on it in a boat and it's a big nuisance. But it's the putting ourselves in the space, I suppose, physically and emotionally and psychologically to gaze upon it in a way that allows us to be inspired by it or to appreciate it and to just to observe it and what have you. And so when you ask me what comes to mind, several things come to mind. One is that, yes, we have wonder and splendor all around us, so much that is at times, well, often not appreciated. But the second thing is that to appreciate it, we have to intend to slow down and appreciate it. Because the busyness of life, whether you happen to be living in New York City and don't have any gaze upon those things, or you're living in St. Joseph's and Mary's Bay and rushing around doing what you're doing, or spend your time reading it online, or doing works of mercy, you still miss it, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And you're right on. And you know, and I think
Frank was going to say something.
No, that's okay.
Frank, please.
I was going to say, I was glad that she mentioned people, because I think I was just thinking about pastoral ministry over the years. I have to think about the pilgrimage since I've been coming here. But I think the things that people say to you sometimes in unexpected places are very transforming moments. They have an insight into living. I think in my pastoral ministry, most of the moments that I remember now are the times I was with people where people said things that just transformed my own understanding of it. It gives you not only sight but insight, you know, to something that's deeper. So I was glad you mentioned the people as well. You know.
For people,
Not that we're all in good mood all the time, but I mean, I think there is a quality in us that comes out very strongly.
One of the things I used to do in the summertime, because I spent a lot of time on the west coast of the province, and it's quite different from the east coast. And I used to take boys up Grossmore Mountain, and I can never forget the wonder and awe of looking out across the landscape and the beauty of it, you know, and the sun shining down and the animal life around us, hares and so on, you know. It was absolutely enthralling in a sense, you know. And so that's
Tom, we have these stories. Tom always have these stories. And what I want to add to this conversation is that, you know, we're recognizing the value of our landscape in Newfoundland and Labrador to awaken the soul, and it's there. I think we're at a time now. There's been a renewal in Celtic spirituality over the last number of decades. Not that long, actually. And the Celtic spirituality is, you know, long before God's self in Holy Scriptures, God revealed God's self in creation. And Celtic spirituality is an incarnational spirituality recognizing God in all of creation. For us who have the utter privilege of living on this wild and beautiful island, the invitation is around us everywhere to step out into the landscape with the intention. This is the key, right? To step out into creation with the intention of encountering and connecting with the living God. And so as we become practiced in this creation-based form of pilgrimage, that's what I'm saying in the context of Newfoundland, Labrador, it is a creation-based form of pilgrimage that I see and that we see. Then we can begin to invite others into a path and experience that we are familiar with ourselves. So, that I think the thing about the whole Celtic thing is about the intention. And then it's about seeing ourselves with that Celtic connection, the Celtic spirituality. It is that we see ourselves not only the interconnectivity of all creation, but we understand ourselves as coming from the Creator. We emerge from God. We're not created ex nihilo out of nothing, but we are created from God. And that's very resonant with the whole Big Bang Theory, where science is that when we're in creation, there's this consciousness, this transformation of consciousness, where we know ourselves to be of the same substance, that this divine life is in us and it is in creation, and there's a connection with it. And so I think as we reflect upon pilgrimage, creation-based pilgrimage, and certainly in the context of Newfoundland and Labrador, it's also a time for us to rediscover our Celtic roots and Celtic spirituality. Any thoughts on that? David? Any thoughts on that, David Bell?
No.
Because I don't see, when we're going to encourage priests and leaders and lay people around, it's not just a walk in the park we're talking about. It's it's the intention to see this that we are connected with the landscape, that we are part of it, and in all its wildness and beauty. Carmel, any thoughts on that?
Like, I don't know what else could happen if you went on this kind of a walk. Like, it's the obvious in one sense. I think probably it's easy walking along that East Coast Trail to get swept up in the expansiveness of it all, which is wonderful. But there's such variance in the land that you're going through that I think you need to pay attention to the small that's there. And I think by paying attention to the small things, like the different plants, the different trees, the different quality of soil, the different rocks and rock types, like paying attention to the small can help you. Not like this, it's a wonderful thing to be awed by expansiveness, but the sense of connection can very often come through the small within that. So okay, go on.
My sense is that, from the bit of work that I've done with meditation and hiking with groups and stuff, is that people don't automatically connect. People bring their head noise out into the wilderness. People bring their head noise out into the trail. It's just a different environment, but the same noise. My point about an intentional spirituality, an intentional creation-based spirituality, is to become knowledgeable and experiencing that oneself, so that it's not just a walk out in the woods, where we can invite others into a different consciousness. Again, it's a transformation of consciousness, a deepening of consciousness. It's a move from our dualistic minds to our unitive hearts, where we are of the same life that is in the creation. So that is a creation-based form of pilgrimage. So it doesn't happen automatically. And if you don't know it yourself, and when it comes to mentoring others, if you're not experienced in this deepening of consciousness, with creation being the guide, then you can't mentor others in that kind of a way. So that's kind of why I raise it. So it doesn't happen automatically.
Gerald, one thing that would, I think, be helpful just as a physical practice within it is because, I mean, again, people today so many of us wear little armbands that tell us how many steps we've gone in the day. And like it's the movement and the motion that's being paid attention to. I think it would be important either to encourage or to even possibly designate, but I don't know how you do that, times within the pilgrim walking to stop.
Oh, 100%, yeah.
But, to stop intentionally and to see what's there, to smell it, taste it, look at it, hear it, whatever. But it's because it'd be too easy when you start talking about the noise that we bring with us. Well, one of the obsessions we seem to have now is how many steps we get in, how far we go, how much we do. And that could be something, I think, that might need not to be stopped, but to be a counterweight given, so that the sense of pausing and noticing the inner and the outer. So
Absolutely.
I'd be looking at that.
And there's lots to look at. So what I want to do, what I've been highlighting is that, first of all, I'm affirming that Newfoundland and our beautiful lands is clearly a place for spiritual encounter. I'm also saying it's not something that happens automatically. That transformation of consciousness is a piece of spiritual work. It's a discipline, and our understanding of our Celtic roots and Celtic spirituality, earth-based, creation-based spirituality, I think needs to be part of the equation, because again, it's not something that happens automatically. The other thing then about this, as we bring this pilgrimage series to a close, is that, and with mentoring others to be pilgrims, there is, we want to invite our spiritual leaders in our parishes and all around the coastline and all over, is to be able to view our landscape as an invitation for spiritual encounter. And so it's here. And so it's what we want to invite people to do is to learn to be more intentional about being out in the landscape, to become familiar with, and to maybe find ways to invite others, not just from our churches and our congregations, but the real possibility to invite others who are just spiritual seekers. So I just want to tell you a little bit of where this has come from for me. So my mama, she's 87 years old, and she lives with dementia, and she moved into a home in Witless Bay some years ago. So I've been on a pilgrimage every Friday across that friggin' Witless Bay line. I got the shit beat out of me truck. And I'm sure I need to take some of whatever money she's got to replace my truck. So every Friday, I'm driving, and then I get up in the morning sometimes and I think, no, boy, I really don't feel like going across there today. So, it's an hour over, and then on the way back it's an hour, so it's 2 hours driving. But over the years, it's become something I look forward to. And so the intent is to go across the Witless Bay line, and the landscape is beautiful. I mean, it's a prayer practice for me to drive across the line to avoid the bigger potholes, at least. But it's a beautiful, and eventually the ocean emerges. And so, that's become something I've become familiar with, going to see my mom and connecting a regular pilgrimage. But what I've done over these years is that to make the most of the amount of time that I have to go, I've ended up hiking the entire East Coast Trail, all 300 kilometers of it, and I've backpacked and camped under 600 campsites. But it's something that I've become very familiar with, and I'm saying it in the context of wherever we find ourselves, whatever parishes we find ourselves in, wherever we find ourselves around the island, we can become familiar with the landscape. And so what happened with my own traveling along that, I met a fellow from the East Coast Trail one day, one of the fellows on the board. Went talking, I told him about how I experienced the trail, and he said, well, maybe you might be able to do something for us when it comes around meditation and spirituality and our trail. So I became a hike leader for the East Coast Trail Association. And so well, actually before then, I began experimenting with clergy, bringing clergy out on meditation hikes, and exploring how meditation and hiking and being in the wilderness can work together. And we explored with different ways of how to be in the landscape spiritually. And so with that, then moved it into the East Coast Trail Association, and I do 2 to 3 hikes a year for them with people who are interested in spirituality and wanting to learn how to meditate with nature. And so, so it's, why I'm raising that is because and like I mentioned earlier about Liz Ward, she said, whatever it is that draws you to and deepens your experience of God, go and do it. So this is something that has drawn me and deepened my experience of God. So I've done it. I've become familiar with it. I've become familiar with the path, both spiritually and physically. And then it put me in a position then to be able to mentor others. And so that's kind of what the topic of this presentation is that it's not just about ourselves, but as leaders, what is the potential for us to be able to bring others, invite and bring others along the spiritual path, the pilgrim path. And so I just think there's lots of opportunity wherever we are. I mean, I'm thinking of a priest now out in the Isthmus who wants to bring me on one of the trails out there and to have a lunch and what have you. I'm going to take him up on that. But there's also, because he's inviting me to go with him, and what potential is for him to potentially bring parishioners or people in his community who might want to learn to pray in those landscapes and see those landscapes as a pilgrim path. And so I think that's where some of the opportunities are for us in Newfoundland and Labrador, is to, like I began by saying, I never looked at our landscape as a place for intentional pilgrimage. Yeah, go for a walk. Yeah, encounter God. I think, holy tamale, that's actually pilgrimage. And so, the invitation is for us to see our landscape a little differently, change our focus a little bit, and say, yeah, this is something that's very beautiful and very inviting, and God is in this landscape, and that I can go and become familiar with encountering God in this landscape as a pilgrim, and then I can potentially invite others to come and join me in this beautiful and rich experience of pilgrimage. So that's kind of, this is a creation-based invitation to pilgrimage that I'm articulating, that will not only attract some church people, but it definitely will attract those seekers and pilgrims who are not interested in religion, but are interested in creation and spirituality. And I certainly see this potential for us and the resource that we have in our backyards. So any comments or ideas or anything around that? That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
I think you're right. I mean, I think it's there. And at various levels, people have been engaging in that for forever, but it's generally been happenstance, individual. The odd time you'll go and with a group, the odd time you might actually be with a group that you could talk about the experience with on even an external level, because lots of times people don't want to even talk about that. So it depends upon the intentionality that the group knows that they're getting into, depending, at the beginning.
Where is the intention, right? And I'm super excited that I'm going to be part of this Chilean pilgrimage with 33 Americans, and I'm going to take them to places that I'm familiar with. I'm going to be able to take them to places where I've encountered, God, and become special to me. So, in a way, then I become a mentor to others. I'm super excited when I can, go on the trail and take a group of people with me with the intention of learning how to open up and deepen our consciousness and our connectivity with God in creation. Yep. So, the word is intention. And so and I think if it's just an invitation to go for a walk, then yeah, that's fine. But as a pilgrim, the intention is everything, so it just invites a deeper opening and conscious connection with. And so that's the piece that I'm kind of suggesting that we highlight. It is our intention as we invite, as we journey ourselves, and then the potential then to invite others.
But I think you need to marry up expectancy with intention.
Right.
So often, you have the intention, but there's never the joy that's attached to expectancy when you discover something for the first time. And that's no better seen here than in the flora, the wild flora and fauna that you sometimes get a glimpse of. If you go down to the Cape Spear, just by the first car park, there are many grassy slopes, and there are hundreds of flora and fauna there in May, June. That if you can recognize them, you wouldn't want even to walk on them. This series that we've done with others is a very meaningful series, because it opened up what is available to anyone should they desire it.
Gerald, one of the things I'd like you to comment on for a moment, you used the term earlier on in describing yourself and early initiatives, a solo pilgrim. You were talking about going off to Canterbury and the like. And then in the latter part of this session, you're talking about being a mentor for others and what have you. I guess a piece that I want us to take a few moments on, and I'm sure everybody might have a thought or an idea on how the how-to part of it, but having that sense or being drawn to go wherever and to appreciate it and to allow it to be a spiritual experience and a journey of some sort for ourselves, that's one thing. But how do we, like, we might say, market it to others? In, say, for instance, in a parish, and there are many people who will say that they get as much or more out of going for a walk as they do going to church. And, but the community aspect of it is seldom achieved by going for a walk or doing any things on our own, separate and in only our own way. So I'd be interested in how this can be brought to people so that they would come together on a Tuesday evening to go for a walk along the shoreline or in the woods or whatever the case might be. And would there be benefit to having some thoughts or ideas laid out at the start of it, or as a collecting together at the end of it to kind of just chat a bit and debrief, or what way would the solo pilgrim become part of community? Or the individuals who are going out to do the trek, we might say, as a group. But being a group doesn't necessarily mean community either. I'm thinking about Christ-centeredness in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, as a leader, first of all, there's an evolution. And so, to be a pilgrim leader, I don't think it's something that, that's not where someone starts in community. So I think the solo piece is an important piece in the evolution of our consciousness. And it's important to be able to begin in that solo place, if you will, to go off into the desert by yourself, before you can go off in community. And so I think for all of us, there's an evolutionary process of our own development, and which goes from, it's like the psychological development, from dependence, to independence to interdependence, so it's important that we have that time alone. It's important, in those places that give life to our soul, that draws us deeper into God. And out of that familiarity and out of that confidence of that path and that environment, then of course we're in a better position to invite others to join us. So with reference to your question about community, I mean, and I know when I do the meditative hikes on the East Coast Trail, and I might get a group of 20 people, let's say, and the whole intention in that context is to connect with creation. So it's not a church thing as much as it is a creation-based thing. And people are going to be at it from all different levels. And just to some of what I do is, and I teach two different things on that particular hike, that particular pilgrimage. The first part of the walk is slow and intentional. So the invitation is for people not to try to name flora or birds or trees, but just to connect with and to linger and take it, and whatever attracts your eye, your attention, stay with it, linger. And it's a very slow pace. At the end of that component, which may take up to an hour and a half, with different places to collect the community along the way, we then have some opportunities in small groups to talk about what that experience was for us. And then on the return leg of that particular hike is we focus on another kind of meditation where it's just our breath and our step, and we stay together as a community. And again, at the end of that, we talk about what the experience was. So that's what I do on the trail. That's what I have been doing a number of years, about inviting people to begin the practice of meditation and hiking. So to take that then, and if I were to do that here on the Burnt Head Trail, with people from my parish who've been asking me to do it, and so it's really kind of time we should, it'd be the same kind of thing. It would be, because what we're trying to do is invite people to see differently. I mean, where our disconnect is from creation, from God, is when we're only living our lives, from our self-conscious level, our dualistic minds. The spiritual journey, the kenotic process, is about dying to that self-conscious self and opening up to our deeper and truer self, the mind of Christ, in which we all live that unit of life. And so that's the whole process, and that's the whole invitation, is how to get out of our heads and into our hearts using the landscape. And so, I mean, it is a way of seeing and a way of being, and in a flow together. So I don't know if that helps at all, Rick, but that's my answer.
I was going to make a comment, Gerald. Just we talk about the beauty of nature, the beauty of creation. And we kind of forget that underneath that beauty, or that which we see, there's one species preying on another, one insect biting another, and the earth is fumbling up lava to spew out in volcanoes. And I'm sometimes wondering whether we get too romantic about the beauty of it, and sort of that negative side that say Job struggles with in the book of Job. How that, I mean, and that's created by God, who is good and loving and so on. But I'm wondering sometimes if there's not an underlying issue that we just sort of gloss over because it's rather difficult to cope with. People die, people have awful deaths, I've seen them. And in that natural order, all this other stuff is going on. I know the beautiful sunset, species are preying on each other. I turn on television sometimes, I got to turn it off because I can't hear the animals, grabbing each other and pulling them underwater. So I'm wondering if in our spirituality we've neglected that kind of what I suppose what Job calls the dark side of God. But I don't know. I'm just wondering, how that comes.
Yeah, a couple of things I would say to that, Frank. I mean, one is that because it's. Have I ever told you my whale story?
Pardon me? I didn't hear what you said.
Whale story. You want to hear his whale story? No.
Oh, that's not Jonah swallowing the whale, is it?
But when I'm out, there's, you can blow sunshine up someone's arse, right? But I mean, it doesn't take much to come back to reality, and and of course, creation keeps us real and humble. I mean, Rick knows the story. I was a kayak in Witless Bay a few years ago, 3 or 4 kilometers offshore. Humpback whales are all beautiful until you almost run into one. And I was almost capsized by a humpback whale, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't have the right kayak training then. I do now. I could have drowned. And so whenever I think about that story, my body remembers trauma. And so, yeah, the whale is beautiful, but when it almost runs into your kayak, it's friggin' frightening.
Yeah.
And every time I recall that story, so there's a beauty, but I mean, being out in the wilderness is also reminds you how fragile everything is at the surface. When I'm walking some of those cliffs on the East Coast Trail, and it's 1,000 feet drop to your death. It's beautiful to look at, but if you get too close, it's like holy tamale, right? So creation for me reminds me of the fragile nature of life, and the living and the dying, and the dying and the rising, and so that's certainly how creation works for me. But underneath that which is changing and coming and going, and again, the whole Celtic thing is that we all live of the same substance. We come from God. We live our lives in God. We return to God. We're in that flow. We're in that relational life. And so what is true and lasting, that is my deeper self, that remains in God no matter what happens at the surface. So for me, being in nature reminds me of the frailty of my life, reminds me of the transitory nature of my life. It also reminds me that there's a deeper life that I am, and that my grasping and clinging and controlling and manipulating is something that's at the surface, and it's something that I need to constantly die to, because in the end I'm not in control, but I am alive, and I'm part of this larger life that is in creation. So that's certainly how that would work for me, Frank.
But I think the issue that I'm is this is how we relate that to the image of the Creator. Does that say anything about the nature of God? That we've misunderstood all this perfection that we put on God. It kind of anyway.
Yeah, I hear you.
That's the issue that I feel, and I think that's one of the problems with spirituality today. We've got this idea that of God, of the Greek perfection, and I think there's that other dark side that Job tries to deal with in his book that is in there. And I guess we can't solve it. We just have to live with it, and grow with it.
And one of the things which, not to lessen anything that Frank has just said, but through the awareness and development of education in the area of nature, and the fact that we are constantly learning about creatures and how one is necessary for the other, that is the sort of thing that helps me in the situation in which you're asking the question. And that's it used to bother me far more than it does now, and it's because the knowledge keeps coming and coming about nature and so on, that it never ceases to amaze me, and I mean, just the mere fact that a couple of days ago we had that image of the black hole, which just blew me away. I just
larger than our
I couldn't cope with that.
Death feels
well, it's
like
all right to have the balance, but you got to. There's somebody who suffers in the balance,
Oh yes, that's right. Yeah.
But I guess that can be part of it too, isn't it? That problem of evil, you might say, the dark side, the shadow side of it. I mean, when I look at some of the ads on the tourism, Newfoundland tourism, there, they're beautiful. But some of the coastlines that they show are ones that I'm a bit familiar with from, just because of where they are. But I know that there were, ships that ran up on those cliffs and thousands of people, Newfoundlanders and others died in the shipwrecks and what have you. And, I'm sure those people who were on the decks of ships going in the fog and had lost their bearings because of the heavy tide in St. Mary's Bay, they didn't see anything awesome. It was awful, and to be dreaded and what have you. But it does when we, I suppose, if we allow ourselves to go there, bring us into the mystery of it all. And I guess to draw on the interesting point that Neil brought to it, too, it sounds us to come away from that kind of reflection and awe and to some measure of action, whether it's about the environment or about social justice, that it isn't just doing a pilgrim for kind of a nice charge for ourselves and a good feeling experience, but it is, about coming forward from it to feel some zeal. At least some of it can be that, the good boost for ourselves and balancing out from our day-to-day anxieties. That's part of it too. But call to action is important as part of it as well.
It is, for sure it is. And at the heart of it, I mean, the whole this journey from over these last 6 weeks, this Lenten Pilgrim series is, from death to life. I mean, and at the heart of the pilgrim journey is dying, and opening up to a newer and larger life that we are part of. And so whatever the suffering and pains are, they're real, but underneath there is that one life that we are in, that Trinitarian life, that relational life that we are in a flow with. So we are dying, to our suffering and our pain, and ultimately opening up to that larger life of God that we're all part of, and we call it resurrection. And in the end, it's mystery, and it's creative tension that we're always part of this new and emerging life. And as the universe expands by this Trinitarian principle, we are part of that. We're that one life that is God, and so we die and we rise again. Thanks be to God.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Gerald. Any last minute comments before Gerald wraps up the session and the series with a closing prayer?
Thank you for organizing it. All those who took part and organized. It was good. It's very good.
That's been a good job.
I must say, it's helped me, I have to think a lot about my own ministry and my own pilgrimage, especially at the stage of life I'm at now. And this has brought it into focus. And I've thought a lot about some of the people I've met, and how they've transformed my life. So thank you.
Gerald, you can bring us to an end with a closing prayer.
Okay, my friend. I just want to close with that same prayer we opened with. Like an infant's opened-eyed wonder, and the insights of a wise grandmother. Like a young man's vision for justice, and the vitality that shines in a girl's face. Like tears that flow in a friend bereaved, and laughter in a lover's eyes. You have given us ways of seeing, O God. You have endowed us with sight like your own. Let these be alive in us this day. Let these be alive in us. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Gerald.
Thank you.
Fine job.
Have a good Lent, or good Easter, I mean.
Good Lent too. Still a bit of it left.
Yeah,
Tiny bit.
Indeed. Right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Let's go.
Folks, anyone want to stay for a bit of lunch? We have some pizza and so on there.